Hey you all, welcome to this new session of Global Angular Meetup, presented to you by This.media, Angular MTV Meetup, and Nrwl. I'm your host, Daniel Marin, and I'm part of the team of This.labs, and I have two special guests today with us. We have Tracy from This. And we have Jeff Grass from Nrwl. Say hi,
Hello.
please, to everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, and before we start, we have a bunch of announcements, and I know you know already, but we have a bunch of events going on, and I want to share a little bit with you. So we have coming along the Global React Meetup on September 10th. We have the another session of Global Angular Meetup. This is in Español, which is the Spanish version we do. That's in partnership with Angular Montevideo. This is going to be on September 16th. Then we have a Global View Meetup on September 17th. And we have our monthly mentoring session, Women in Tech, on September 23rd. That's going to be with Tracy, right? I know everyone loves those sessions, right? Well, if you have anything you want to ask us or you want to follow us to find out more about events, blog posts, podcasts, and everything else we do, please reach out to us. You can follow us on Twitter at this.media, and we'll answer any of your questions. We are also hosting our next JavaScript Marathon this month on September 23rd. JavaScript Marathon is a full day of live trainings on various frameworks and topics. Join us for Angular training all about using Angular libraries in an NX repo with Pato Vargas. My boy Pato is going to be there with you. So today, well, you have me hosting as usual, but we have, as I said before, one of our special guests is Jeff Gross. He's a co-founder and principal architect in Nrwl. And we have a very special speaker. We have Minko joining us again. He's a software engineer on the Angular team at Google. And well, for today, we have a very short schedule. We have this very brief introduction. Then we leave it to Minko to tell us all about the state of Angular. And then we're going to have a panel of questions. So if you have any questions, just drop them on the comments and we'll be reading them just right after Minko finishes his session. So, well, I'll leave it up to you, Minko. I'm going to take myself and all your guests from the stream so you can have the stage all for yourself.
Sounds good. All right. Yeah, hello, everyone. My name is Minko Gechev. I'm working as an engineer at the Angular team at Google. Today in this presentation, I want to share with you what is the current state of Angular. So the way that this presentation is going to go is first, we're going to peek into some of the fundamental decisions that we made in Angular, which I believe are unique to our platform, since they're putting us in a unique position to provide tooling that has certain properties that we believe are important. After that, we're going to look at what we shipped as part of version 10, what is coming up in version 11, and what is our plan from there. So the theoretical part first. I really like theoretical computer science. So I truly believe that the theoretical computer science, it gives you a really good foundation. It doesn't matter whether you have a degree in computer science, just looking at the individual algorithms that we are stepping on as software engineers and concepts, they're going to help you have deep understanding of different technologies. It doesn't matter which framework exactly you're using or which language, all of them share very much the same concepts. And some of these concepts are sometimes not too obvious. For example, Radu Kirov, who was part of the TypeScript portion of the Angular team in the past, who is now still working on TypeScript, but now the TypeScript team is kind of separate from Angular since they have a bigger role in Google since then. He gave a really excellent talk called The Power of Constraints. There he's telling how dynamic structures are not always the best way to go. He's also discussing how setting some constraints on top of the APIs and languages that we're using can actually have a really nice effect on top of the end result, just by bringing us higher performance and also better development experience. I would very strongly recommend you to take a look at his talk. Just to give you one very brief example of why setting constraints could be a good thing, we can talk about algorithms just for a second. So probably you know that sorting numbers is something that you need to do once in a while. probably it's not worth it to memorize all the different sorting algorithms out there, because we also have the built-in sort, array prototype sort algorithm that is brought to us by the V8 virtual machine, which is really well optimized. Well, certain inputs, however, can be better processed by alternative algorithms compared to the built-in one. Here is an example. This is something that I wrote like about probably an hour before the talk. I compared the performance of the built-in sorting algorithm with counting sort. So counting sort is a special sorting algorithm that can perform specifically on integer from 0 to n. Just by setting this constraint that we know that our input is only going to consist of integers, we can improve the performance of our sorting 5 times. So this is how we can set constraints on top of our inputs. We can also set similar constraints on top of the APIs that we're using. A very common trade-off that is well known in computer science is the trade-off between static and dynamic systems. The static systems are setting some constraints on top of the languages or the frameworks that we're using. And these constraints can lead to some significant performance and development experience improvements. To give you a more practical context of this trade-off, we can put different languages on the axis here. For example, here we have Rust, which is a pretty static language. If you have used Rust, probably you know about this concept of borrowing different references and different variables. And thanks to the constraints that Rust sets about these borrowing, Rust is able to manage our memory automatically without having garbage collection, thus being much faster compared to, let's say, Go, JavaScript, and Ruby in certain scenarios. And at the same time, not ask us to think about memory management the same way that we would have to do in C or C++. So Rust sets these constraints about how we can use different variables and how we can mutate them. But at the same time, it provides us with a lot of benefits for better development experience by not managing memory manually and making our program really fast. It knows exactly when it can deallocate a particular piece of memory. On the other side, we have a very dynamic set of languages. We have JavaScript and Ruby. They're pretty powerful as well. Excuse me. They're pretty powerful as well, especially if we have to prototype something very quickly and this system does not, it's not performance critical, and it's not going to scale to millions or tens of millions of lines of code. Ruby and JavaScript are ideal. I mean, we can build even larger scale systems with them, but they're a little bit more challenging in this scenario. TypeScript takes a really great place into the middle. It scales really well thanks to its type system. We can very easily refactor source code, and at the same time, it is not too static, it is not too restrictive. We don't have to know exactly every each detail about our program ahead of time so that the compiler can optimize it. It just sets a bunch of constraints with its type system so it can help us catch many issues ahead of time. In Angular, we have our own set of constraints. And since, as I mentioned, we're kind of in a unique position to set these constraints, I want to go through the benefits that some of these constraints actually have to offer. Let us first look at the static templates and styles. The static templates and styles allow us to analyze them ahead of time before we ship the application in the browser. This way, with our ahead of time compilation, we can very easily generate efficient instructions for rendering and change detection of the view. We have also zero runtime overhead internationalization. So we did a lot of improvements actually in our internationalization. We are going to follow up with a blog post soon on blog.angular.io, where we're going to talk about how much faster the build time is right now with our new i18n, and also how you can load translations at runtime. All right, so another thing that the static HTML templates bring is zero overhead in terms of runtime execution, view encapsulation. At build time, we can analyze the styles, and we know their scope pretty well, depending on in which components they are declared, and we can provide this emulated view encapsulation, with pretty much zero overhead, only thanks to the fact that we're following some patterns and some constraints on how we can define the styles in our components. The static routing configuration helps us bring some further improvements. I wouldn't say that this is a significant advantage, and it only exists in Angular itself. This is the static routing configuration is something that is common in other frameworks out there as well. For example, if you look at Next.js, they, in a similar way, can determine what are the different routes in an application statically just by analyzing the directory structure. In Angular, we can perform many optimizations thanks to this static route configuration as well, where for the individual routes, we just have string literals, which are well-defined in the different routing modules. This helps us to improve the performance of navigations by using fancy things such as predictive prefetching with guess.js. It also helps us to pre-render the individual routes in our application just by first statically discovering them, and right after that, pre-rendering them one by another. The encapsulated configuration, however, sometimes brings like a lot of frustrations to developers, especially because originally we had this ng-eject command that was allowing you to just like output your Webpack configuration on the disk, and from there, you're pretty much by yourself to maintain it. I'm pretty happy that we made the decision to remove the ng-eject commands and keep the configuration really well encapsulated. Because this way, very easily across versions, we can actually ship very significant changes and improvements in the build process that are leading to smaller bundles and faster applications. We can very easily seamlessly run the ng update command and migrate your project very easily from one version to another. In fact, in version 8, we kind of rewrote almost the entire Angular CLI, just because we wanted to switch to a more maintainable structure of the repository and like the entire implementation of our builders. So we did that with 0 breaking changes there. And that's only thanks to the fact that our configuration is really well encapsulated. Now, a few other benefits that we're getting from such systems, static systems, is that they really can understand the source code of our programs ahead of time. This means that they can pretty much transform our, let's say, Angular templates to a more efficient version of themselves, which is like JavaScript instructions, IV instructions. The strict type checking is something that helps us catch many more issues ahead of time. And programs which are written in a very dynamic language, they can't be really well type checked. So we need to have some static constraints, such as type annotations and the compiler, that is guarding us to hit some very frequent errors that can pretty much occur in runtime otherwise. The zero overhead runtime, runtime overhead internationalization is something that I'm actually quite excited about. After we share the blog post with our motivation to approach the situation this way, I'm really hoping that you're going to see the value that it provides as well. Well, dynamic systems are not bad either. We can very easily lazy load component or even dynamically assemble the user interface. The problem there is that we don't have these constraints that are allowing our application to scale well. So at certain point, after certain like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of lines of code, it's just going to be really hard for us to manage all this complexity. But at the same time, we really don't need even a build process if we were writing our programs from scratch with JavaScript using all the different features that the browser supports at a certain point, because we'll have been able to just like provide a single script tag that implements our entire app, right? So both systems, they have their pros and cons. And in Angular, we truly believe that in order to build scalable and fast applications, you need to have some constraints that allow you to scale, allow you to communicate better in your team, and so on and so forth. So I'm hoping that in the rest of the presentation, you're going to see how all the different themes of the efforts that we're working on, they're all around finding the right balance between static and dynamic, finding the right balance between providing different constraints and letting you to just scale better while we're preserving certain development experience. So I had this thought that build time errors are a great thing, actually, because you can get some of the bugs ahead of time in your program instead of waiting for your final end users hitting certain bugs at runtime in production. If you get these errors at build time, you'll be able to fix them and like handle them before you actually deploy your application to production. So this is something that's probably not obvious at first. And it is really not obvious because it's hard to quantify it. It's hard to understand how many more issues actually the TypeScript type system is going to let you catch. But there was also research by folks coming from the academia and Microsoft who tried to put a number on this. They tried to see how many more issues you have been able to detect at build time if you were using the TypeScript type system and if you were using TypeScript instead of using JavaScript. So these researchers, they pretty much looked at different open source projects on GitHub. They analyzed their issue tracker and they tried to figure out how many of these issues in the issue tracker would have been detectable by TypeScript while developing your application. They figure out that this percent is about 15. So about 15% of these issues you would have been able to get ahead of time before you ship application to production. And this was with TypeScript 2.0. Since then, we are much further ahead. So we actually have TypeScript 4.0, which is even now supported by Angular CLI 10.1. All right, so I hope that I was able to like demystify some of our motivations at the Angular team to set some constraints so that we can enable all the different applications to scale, and also that our efforts are pretty much following this philosophy. Now let us look at what's new in Angular. After that, we're going to look at what's coming up next, and finally, we're going to have a peek into the future. So in version 10, we focused on two main things. So we're providing an opt-in strict flag so that we can see how many more constraints we can set when building Angular applications without significantly increasing the entry barrier to Angular, and also by making sure that we're not regressing development experience. Also, we focused on increasing the visibility of what we have been up to so that we can communicate our vision better, we can communicate our future efforts better, and we can include everyone into the process of making decisions in terms of like next features or specific feature concerns that we believe that developers may have. Now let us first focus on the opt-in strict flag. The strict mode in Angular, you can take advantage of it by creating a new project and specifying the -- strict flag. You're going to get an Angular CLI application that by default is going to have a few things enabled. For example, you're going to have the strict flag in your tsconfig.json. It is always also going to enable strict template type checking for Angular so that we can perform strict template type checking as well. Pretty much the same way that you're going to have strict type checking in your TypeScript portion of your Angular application, you're going to have the same set of constraints for your templates. So you'll be able to catch issues in your templates ahead of time. In strict mode, we are also disabling the any type completely. So this could be like quite invasive, especially for folks who are just getting started with the framework, which means that we haven't decided on enabling these flags by default yet, these options by default yet. But this is just something that we're experimenting with. We're also experimenting with tighter bundle budgets. The bundle budgets are a way for us to let you know when your bundles go above certain size. This way, you'll be able to catch performance regressions in your application. For example, imagine you just import the wrong symbol from RxJS and your bundles blows up. Or imagine that you introduce like super large JSON file as part of your main bundle by mistake. The tighter performance budgets are going to help you catch that. Also, we're experimenting with reduced side effects. The reduced side effects are assuming that on top level in your modules, you're not performing any side effects. For example, on top level, you're not accessing local storage, or you're not sending any XML HTTP requests. With this assumption, we can more efficiently tree-shake your application and produce smaller bundles. Well, the strict mode means that you will be getting more compile time errors. So you'll be getting more of these. But at the same time, we'll be able to catch you more issues and making your application faster ahead of time. Let me talk about some of these constraints. For example, we also enabled an opt-in CommonJS. By default, if you're using CommonJS modules in your application, you will be getting a bunch of different warnings in the console. And we did this quite intentionally. In fact, CommonJS modules are really hard to optimize. To take advantage of CommonJS modules, and it's like tree shaking in general, I mean, you shouldn't be using CommonJS modules at all. You can learn more details about we made this decision in this blog post here on web.dev. Pretty much with this, we're also hoping to encourage more library authors to start shipping newer module formats as part of their packages so that generally the entire ecosystem can start optimizing applications better. Regarding strict mode, as I mentioned, strict mode could be quite constraining, and it may even impact your development experience. But at the same time, we would want to enable at least some of these features by default so that we can make the Angular application development even more scalable and easier to catch, to make it easier to catch issues ahead of time. So we wrote, I wrote this blog post that we published on blog.angular.io, which explains in details what exactly strict mode is all about. I would really love to hear your thoughts on which strict mode features you would want to see enabled by default in Angular CLI so that you can help us just to make the Angular tooling better. We'll be making this decision eventually in version 11, or maybe we're going to delay it if we see that we don't have enough input. Now let's talk about the increase of community visibility. Probably the biggest thing that happened for Angular in 2020 was the Angular roadmap. I think that's maybe the first time that we were able to share a public roadmap for Angular. And by public, I just mean to share all the efforts that we have been up to and that we'll be working on in the future. And to add a little bit more context so that we can make it clear what the individual projects actually mean for people who are not constantly thinking about Angular and our tooling infrastructure. So Jules, she shared this blog post on Angular.io, and also there is a link to the actual roadmap and to the prioritization process that we're following. I can share just some very brief details so that I don't bore you, but in general, we're having feature requests and bug reports from a lot of different places. Clearly, GitHub, we have quite a few there. Most of our Google customers, they're reporting issues on GitHub as well, since we're building Angular for everyone, and most issues are relevant, unfortunately, for everyone as well. We're also collecting a lot of different feedback from different partners, a lot of external partners, large banks, different airlines, let's say, and so on and so forth. We're collecting all this feedback. We're mixing it together from it clearly gets from different parties, and we're prioritizing it in monthly or weekly. We started doing weekly meetings where we're going through hundreds of different large projects, not individual bugs. We're going through these large projects, which are taking weeks or months of work, and trying to put them in a list relative to each other, depending on what is going to be the impact on the entire ecosystem and depending on how much work we need to do on a certain effort. So we came up with different efforts which are primarily focused on stability, development experience, and speed. Here is what we're currently working on. Actually, there are quite a few more projects. You can look at our roadmap on Angular.io to see them all. Here are some of them. We believe that test harnesses are a best practice that needs to be just popularized, that needs to be more widely used. Test harnesses are a way for you to test your application without coupling to the DOM structure of particular material, let's say widgets that you're using. So with test harnesses, we're aiming to enable best practices for you, for your end-to-end tests and unit tests as well. We are also working on TypeScript 4.0 support. We're working on improving our end-to-end testing story, but here we're mostly on a planning stage because changing our end-to-end strategy is going to have an enormous impact on hundreds of thousands of projects. So we're quite concerned on making very bold moves. We would want to listen to everyone. We would want to understand what are individuals' projects' requirements and figure out the optimal strategy to move forward. We're also migrating our material design widgets components to material design web. We have a material design team at Google, and it's kind of a wasted effort to implement the material design specification for each different technology that we have inside of the company, when there is the material design team who have implemented all the material design components for web components. So what we're going to do here is just like wrap these web components in Angular and make sure there are no any size or performance regressions, when at the same time we're getting better accessibility and alignment with the material design spec. Trusted types is another effort we're trying to keep up to date with the web platform. We have trusted types, which are reducing the cross-site scripting attack surfaces dramatically, but since then, since we implemented them, they became a web standard, and we're working with our security team on using the browser solution instead of having a custom one. We're working on faster application loading. So we noticed that we're serving some blocking assets, and in the next couple of days, we're going to share an RFC on how, where we're going to share different proposals on how we can fix this efficiently. So we would love to hear your thoughts about this as well. Once we share the RFC, we're going to announce it also on Twitter so that everyone can take part in the actual discussion process. Ivy libraries is another large effort. Probably as you remember, we are not encouraging you to distribute any Ivy source codes to the package managers right now, to the package repositories such as NPM. Instead, we're encouraging you to ship still Vue engine source code that we are later transforming to Ivy instructions by using the Angular compatibility compiler. This, however, is not a very optimal strategy. By using the strategy, we're slowing down the build process even further by introducing the compatibility compiler. And at the same time, well, we cannot get rid of some legacy Angular source code that is taking a lot of our time to maintain and keep up to date. What we're planning to do here is, well, I'm actually going to talk about this further, but generally come up with a strategy on how we can make it efficient for everyone to ship Ivy libraries and distribute them directly on NPM without having this intermediate compatibility step. And Bylock. Bylock is an interesting project that aims to pretty much help us deal with some of the issues that we have collected in the Angular repository. So I'm going to talk about this just in a little bit. But before that, just wanted to share that one of these current projects is already completed. We spent some time migrating to TypeScript version 4. We migrated our entire tooling and like all the different APIs that we're stepping on top of the TypeScript compiler to the new version 4. And in fact, we released it yesterday as part of 10.1.0. So you can take advantage of the latest features there, such as labeled tuples and much more. Now, Bylock. Bylock is our code name for a project where we're aiming to spend up to 50% in issue triage. So far, we had success in 30% issue reduction on the Angular CLI, and we triaged pretty much all the components issues. These 40 issues here are probably a little bit out of date. I would say that we maybe have just a few untriaged issues in the component repository. The framework repository, if you look at it, it still has quite a few issues. Like we're triaging them constantly, but they're a little bit more, let's say, the impact on making large-scale changes is going to, this is going to impact many more projects. So we're very cautious on updating the on the foundations of the framework. But yeah, we're going to make a progress there as well. I will be keeping you up to date with this. Now, let us talk about what you can expect from version 11. So version 11 in general is going to be a very small release. It is going to be very easy to update, and the things that we'll be focusing on primarily is dropping some dependencies which have been deprecated and also removing some of our deprecations. For example, we'll be migrating to ESLint. ESLint still is going to bring some weight to the overall Angular CLI since it has more dependencies, but at the same time, we would want to migrate to the ecosystem solution that is currently widely popular and used. We're going to do this migration thanks to the fantastic ESLint community. Like big thanks to all the open source maintainers who are working on Angular ESLint, on TypeScript ESLint, and on ESLint itself. They did a fantastic job, and they made our life to migrate all Angular projects really easy. Smaller bundles is something that you're going to get from us dropping some deprecations, some deprecated APIs, and also dropping support for IE9 and IE10. That's pretty much everything in V11. It should land somewhere in November. And as I mentioned, it's not going to be a large release. It's going to be easy to update. So yeah, I hope that just running ng update is going to do all the work for you. Now let us look at what's coming next, because there are quite a few interesting efforts, and some of them are very much in progress. We're close to their completion, but still we don't want to rush and push them as part of version 11, since the timeline is pretty tight, and we want to make sure that everything is working well as expected. So Ivy library distribution. As I mentioned, we want to drop this Angular compatibility compiler, right? So in order to drop it, we need to find a way to distribute libraries without at the same time dramatically increasing the public API of Angular by shipping Angular Ivy instructions to NPM. So what we're planning to do is introduce an option in our Angular compiler called published library. When you build your project as a published library, instead of producing Ivy instructions, we're going to produce an intermediate format by using the ngDeclare component annotation here. That is going to contain all the different metadata for your library that we need in order to compile it to Ivy instructions. You can distribute this to NPM. So once your consumers of your library download this intermediate format, all they would need to do is compile it with our Angular linker, in order to get the final Ivy format. This, of course, is going to happen like all automatically for you. We're going to update the Angular CLI so that we can produce this intermediate format. We're also going to update the Angular CLI so that we know when we're working with a library intermediate format, so that we know that we can compile it directly to Ivy instructions. This overview here was pretty much mostly for like all the interested folks who are developing libraries and who are interested in the internals of our implementation. In fact, if you're interested in the internals even more, you can take a look at our now closed RFC on Ivy library distribution. There, for 2 weeks, we shared our proposal for distributing Ivy libraries. We had a bunch of open questions, and we collected really valuable feedback from everyone from the community who wants to join. So we finalized the solution, and we're currently in the process of implementation. I'll say that the Ivy library distribution, you could probably expect it in version 12 coming up in 2021. Still don't want to set any hard deadlines, but in my opinion, that is a pretty reasonable timeline. Something else that you're getting thanks to an improvement in the ecosystem itself is much faster incremental builds thanks to a migration that we're currently working on Webpack version 5. So Webpack version 5 is planned to be released on the 10th of October, I believe. We're in a constant touch and like collaboration with the Webpack team in order to make sure that we're taking advantage of their latest and greatest improvements that they're bringing on the table. At the same time, we want to wait with another couple of months to make sure that Webpack gets in a really stable state so that we don't have any unexpected issues in the Angular CLI that are going to impact Angular developers. Webpack 5 is bringing better tree shaking for certain module formats. So you're going to have smaller bundles. And at the same time, it has this persistent disk caching, which you can actually take advantage of today by using Bazel, but with the cost of much extra configuration. So Webpack and Bazel is pretty much the same trade-off as static and dynamic that we talked about. And Webpack provides a really great development experience. I'm really happy that they were able to figure out this path to incremental builds so that we can provide like times faster production builds for everyone just by caching the intermediate artifacts. Well, Angular DevTools is another effort that we have been working on. Angular DevTools is a application, a Chrome DevTools extension that is going to allow you to debug your Angular applications, to profile them, and also just understand their component structure much better. To a certain extent, it is very similar to Augury. We're in fact collaborating with the Augury team at Rango in order to deliver this experience. So in DevTools, you can see the same components tab where you'll be able to pick different components, explore their internal state, and update it. But also we have other features, such as profiling, where you'll be able to see which components are the bottleneck in the change detection execution. You'll be able to see what exactly triggers change detection and when. We have been already using it for a few projects at Google. We just want to make sure that it provides value and the necessary tools to make it successful. And we'll be thinking about a timeline in which we can make it available for everyone. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to see the very early alpha in the next couple of months. Some of the future, and I'll say really large projects that we're currently in a very early planning stage are better forms. Well, this has been #1 feature request for quite some time now. You'll be surprised how challenging it could be to improve forms without bringing so much pain to the entire Angular community with migrating projects. So we want to plan this effort really well. This is a large project, but we're probably going to deliver it incrementally on different steps. For example, first, deliver better typings, and from there, address other feature requests and bug reports that you have had. Next, we're planning on optional zone. So you can already actually run an Angular application without zones. You can just specify the zone to be no operation, and everything is going to work as expected, probably for the larger part of the framework, maybe except some material components. But at the same time, this future effort is going to be like much larger compared to this. We're planning, we're just looking in different like state management solutions. We're considering how we can enable like much better like load time improvements and more, but I would prefer to not discuss this much further right now, since these are just like hallway discussions that we have had once we were in the office, and right now we're trying to have them over GVC. Once we move forward with this effort, we're going to first share a public RFC where we'll be able to include everyone in the discussion, and from there on we can pretty much make the decisions together. Optional ng modules is something that we have been talking about for a while. I would say that this is not such a large effort, but it is a really impactful effort. We would have potentially 2 different ways of doing things, and we want to make sure that we're not creating division in community, and we would really want to keep the Angular framework consistent so that for everyone, it can be easy to move across projects and understand Angular applications just by looking at the source code. So this is something else that we're planning for the next couple of releases. And of course, ergonomic component level code splitting. You can in fact already achieve this, but you would still need to use some legacy ng factory APIs, which are no longer relevant with Ivy. So we would just want to make this experience much simpler. This is going to be mostly an ergonomic, like development experience improvement, rather than a too dramatic performance improvement or whatever. I'll still encourage you to definitely look into component level code splitting to make your initial load times faster. That was pretty much everything. I just want to bring you back to our goals: stability, development experience, and speed. I really hope that at the beginning of the presentation, you saw how just by bringing some constraints, we were able to provides certain guarantees and make your Angular applications more correct and faster. Well, thank you very much for your attention. If you have some feedback for this talk, and if you would have wanted to hear more, just feel free to fill the survey at ngv.io/talk. And now I would love to hear your questions and discuss the state of Angular.
Thanks. Yeah. Really awesome talk as usual. And I really love the part about the compilation errors. I always say that to everybody, like being able to capture errors in compilation time is a game changer. And that's one of the things that I really love. So we have a bunch of questions here, so I'm going to highlight them and you can feel free to answer them. Let me just scroll up here. Oh, this one is good. So we got Lancifini. He's asking, is it possible to exclude specific libraries from the bundled budget? For example, what if I have one big third-party lib that I just can't get away from, but I want to reduce the rest of the bundle?
Yeah, what you can do here is just like load it lazily. That's going to be my recommendation for sure, instead of updating the budget. What you could do also is just like bump up your budget. You know what is the size of this library. It's pretty much a constant size. So you can take your bundle budget and increase it with the size of this third-party library. Although I would go with lazy loading in this case, in which case this library is going to go into a separate bundle that is going to be checked with the performance budget by its own.
Cool. I know there was another question that was really cool about the ESLint, TSLint. I don't seem to find it. Oh, yeah, here it is. It was next to the other one. We'd love to hear more about the plan to fully deprecate TSLint in favor of TSLint.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the community has done some fantastic job already. James, Henry specifically, he built so much cool stuff on top of in order to support TypeScript in ESLint. And all the migration tools are currently out there. So what we're going to do is write a bunch of documentation for the version 11 release on how everyone can migrate their application to ESLint. Probably this is going to be a slightly more manual step. We don't want to have magical migration step here, which is not going to work for a large chunk of developers. On top of that, I guess we're going to update our default linting builder so that we can enable ESLint by default. That's pretty much the entire high-level plan.
Cool. Awesome. We got another question here. Is there any hope of getting a full stack with ORM, etc. from Google?
As an official solution, I wouldn't say so. I think that, I have had some experiments on my own about this, just for fun. I would say that this is quite possible and not too hard to achieve. I would really love to see some community work in this direction. I would love to chat and discuss different ideas.
Awesome. And there's another one. Is there any love coming for Angular elements?
Well, we are. So currently, the biggest problem with Angular elements, I would say, is just like the build process. And well, the build process is just hard. We can spend some time briefly discussing it. The biggest challenge with elements is how to make the bundle small, I guess. And we can make the bundle small we can make elements work in two different ways. In order to have small elements, you can distribute them without them depending on Angular in any way. This means that when you include these elements on the page, you don't know which pieces of Angular they are going to use. So you need to introduce the entire Angular UMD bundle. And that's the best thing that you could do. Alternatively, if you know which elements you're exactly going to use on the page, we can build them together so that they can include all the pieces of Angular that they're using in the final bundle, and you can place it on the page. But in this case, do you really need to use elements? Probably not. This is the same static versus dynamic trade-off, but that's how things are. I wouldn't say that there is a magic trick that we can do and start shipping small elements. making everything also quite dynamic. It's just a trade-off.
That's been and what we've seen too is like if you control the environment, then you can do a lot more optimizations. Like the two main use cases are design systems, where you want to be able to have anyone consume a component, and then you have no idea how they're going to be deployed, and you really can't tree shake aggressively. And then you have like CMS or dynamic layouts, where it's like you kind of know the environment, you know the set of components that will be deployed there, and you can do it. But yeah, it's pretty bespoke to support either of those.
True. So is there anything else you want to share, Tracy, Jeff, Minko, before we close our session today?
How's Bulgaria?
It's great, actually. Yeah, it's late, but aside from that, it's a really nice place. It's a nice escape from what's currently, unfortunately, happening in the world. I'm in a small town with like 10,000 people right now.
Oh yeah.
So we have fast internet connection
You
next
escaped
to
the
the
fires
river.
in San Francisco.
Yeah, you're in a happy little bubble.
For the first time, actually, the air quality in the capital of Bulgaria is better than San Francisco. It's usually much, much different.
Yeah. How's the weather?
It's about 80 degrees, so.
Yeah. Everyone seems shocked that I'm asking about Bulgaria weather, but
I'm not
Minko seems caught off guard.
I'm more surprised that he said 80 degrees versus saying it in Celsius. Because Minko, isn't it in Bulgaria you guys use Celsius? I would assume so.
Yeah. Well,
Such
I'm
American.
trying to. I changed my weather app actually so that I can finally start making sense of these Fahrenheit things.
And Lance, Minko did not move back to Bulgaria. He's just visiting for a second. So.
Yeah, we're flying back to the Bay Area.
Is that a lot of the team? Have a lot of people kind of dispersed on the Angular team, or is it just you felt like going back?
I think it's me right now. We have new team members who are like pretty much everyone is working from home. So we had some new people who joined the team and they're working from their like home locations as well until we finally go back to the office. So we are currently like the most distributed that we have ever been, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still trying to maintain Pacific hours. So it's like about lunchtime for me, maybe.
So you have no social life basically in Bulgaria, other than with your friends and family who you see during the day, during the morning?
Yeah, but at the same time, imagine if I liked going to bars and clubs. With this schedule, I would have been able to spend there all nights.
Yeah. Well, you said you're working till like 3 a.m. or something, so you would go to a club at 3 a.m. and party until the sun comes up?
That's actually what I used to do. I used to be when I went to Montreal. There was a club in my hotel, and I would just go sit next to the club and just work. Yeah, until like 11 o'clock at night or whatever. But then I realized street food, because Montreal has a lot of late night street food. I realized that you have to be drunk to eat the street food, otherwise you're not going to feel so good.
Oh, that sounds like Bulgaria a little bit. I didn't know you lived in Montreal.
Well, I mean, I just visited a lot, so.
Okay.
Does Tracy really live anywhere? I mean, now I guess she does with lockdown, but
yeah.
Before that, I felt like she was probably only 5% of the time actually in North Carolina.
I know. Finally, my husband actually has me pinned down for a second.
Yeah.
I just went to Atlanta. So people in Atlanta, come hit me up because, I'm bored. Yes, I see Bill saying hi too. We love you too, Bill. We miss you too. Bill from Angular Bootcamp. Well, yeah, Minko, this is a good question that just popped up. What happened to Angular Dart?
Angular Dart, it's so Angular Dart is owned by a different team, by the Dart team. It exists. It's growing. We are just not very like closely working together. Do
they align with like evolution of Angular TypeScript or like Angular?
I'm not sure. Yeah, we don't work very close together. We just since we don't share our code base right now, we don't have that much intersection. But yeah, it's out there.
Yeah, I think it's still open source, right? So
I believe so, yeah.
I don't know much about Dartland, like if there are other frameworks, but I think for Dart, it's a pretty good choice of framework if you're using Dart. Flutter is obviously the hot thing with Dart these days.
Minko, can we ask you who your favorite new team member on the Angular team is? Who's your?
Oh, that's a hard question.
And I have a follow-up question. Who's your favorite former team member? But we'll wait for that.
That's a really tough question. That's a tough question. I don't really know. I have to I like them all. I work really closely with Mark and Nema, who recently joined the Angular DevRel team. They're both fantastic. I mean, every time after our meetings, I'm with a smile on my face. So I really enjoyed working with them and talking to them. I don't work that closely, let's say, with our new folks on the components team recently. I just don't work too much on components, but Wagner, who recently joined, he's really awesome as well. We play Jackbox once in a while with him, and
oh, awesome!
It's a fun experience, yeah.
Oh man, so politically correct. I mean, you gave us two people, but all right. Now, who's your favorite? Jeff, just follow-up question. What was it again? Who's your favorite
former team member?
Favorite former team member? Yes.
And think who's the one who spent the most time with you before you were on the Angular team, sharing together on Angular Mobile Toolkit.
Should I say Alex?
See, he's actually thinking about it.
Alex Eagle. There we go.
Oh, fine. I miss
yeah,
Alex.
Jeff. Actually, we spent quite some time with Alex Eagle, not on the Mobile Toolkit, but mostly on Bazel stuff. I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Now he's out in the wild working on Bazel. Cool.
Well, this was fun. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to Minko on Twitter. He's one of the nicest people ever. So he's always happy to answer any questions. Are you
we had one question just get popped in. I think is a good one. Any news on Bazel with Angular?
Yeah, Angular with Bazel works. We just think that abstracting Bazel with the Angular CLI is not the best way to go. So if you're going to use Bazel, probably a better idea is to just maintain your build files and build your application using it. Alternatively, if you prefer to have the convenience of the Angular CLI and you also want incremental builds, you can give a try of NX.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, go to nx.dev. We stole all the great ideas from Bazel and made it zero config with Angular CLI.
Teed that one up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both have trade-offs. Unfortunately, there is no complete happiness. It's
That's true.
Or there is. It depends on the perspective, I guess.
Right tool for the job.
Yeah.
It's like Alex Eagle versus Jeff Cross, Bazel versus NX. Which one do you choose?
Let's say Alex versus Victor, so I can be the happy one, the nice one.
You should do a table tennis battle or something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, feel free to follow myself on Twitter @LadyLeet, or Jeff actually has a Twitter handle called Jeff Cross Beard. And unfortunately,
it hasn't been very active lately.
Yeah, his beard is gone though, so
yeah,
maybe that's why the Twitter handle's gone.
Maybe
grow a little patch or something. Maybe dye it yellow or Nrwl blue or something like that.
Or you can follow my pigs on Instagram @JeffBPigs.
Oh, yes, they're very cute. Yes. Mm-hmm. Or if you follow Minko on Instagram, you can see his really cool taekwondo. Is it taekwondo? Minko?
Karate.
It's karate. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have my gear actually right there.
Oh my god, amazing!
Oh, cool! You do karate. Nice.
Minko, do you have access to the new Cobra Kai Netflix series in Bulgaria?
I think I do. I'm getting I'm getting ads of it. I haven't watched it.
I watched the first episode. Maybe it has potential.
Okay.
It's cool. I saw it. It's cool. If you like Karate Kid, you're gonna love Cobra Kai.
Okay.
In my opinion, I'm not doing any ads. I'm not getting paid or anything, but just saying, it was. I liked it.
It
You
was
should
basically
host,
cool
you
if
should
you were
host a
getting
viewing
paid.
party. I would love to watch it with Minko and hear him like technically critique all of the things people say in the show.
Yeah, probably that's going to be the case. Sounds accurate.
Maybe you could write a blog article on dev.to with your thoughts on Cobra Kai.
Sounds like the right place. We can add it to the roadmap.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for all your awesome questions, for being here, for joining us. We had a huge audience today, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to this dot for this space. Thank you for Nrwl for the partnership. Thank you, Angular TV. Thank you, Minko. And I just want to remind everyone that we do also Vue, we do React, we do GraphQL. We have a bunch of events going on. So take advantage of this all times we're living and learn more, watch more videos, watch more events, follow up. And we have all the information in our this.media account in Twitter. So there's a bunch of information and we keep sharing everything we do. So we would love to have you there. So thank you, everyone. And thank you for the guests. And thank you, Minko, once again. I'll see you next session. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.